In Maryland alone, more than 500,000 residents depend on food stamps. That's a 32% increase since 2008. And that means more hardship for a place like Baltimore, where a staggering 20% of residents live below the poverty line.
America prides itself on taking care of its own. We tell the world whenever possible how good life is here for everyone and how we are the nation to be lauded as a leader in taking care of our future generations. But a new study focusing on one American city brings forward a shocking reality that some kids are worse off here than in some African nations. It's a pleasure to welcome back to MidPoint conservative political analyst, author, former diplomat, and one who now calls Maryland home. Alan Keyes joins us. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us again.
Glad to be with you.
This was a frightening story when we saw this. I have spent many times in Baltimore. The city itself has been decaying for many years. There's been a problem here. But this is from a group called the Well-Being of Adolescents in Vulnerable Environments Study, finding that most of the kids there, because of what they have available to them, are worse off than kids in Africa. How are we as Americans supposed to get our mind around this? That should be impossible.
Well, sadly, I think, having myself partly grown up in Baltimore and gone to school there, I, like you, have watched the deterioration of the city. There have been improvements in terms of urban renewal, the wharf and things of this kind, but I think a lot of it has been at the expense of the ordinary folks who live there, including wiping out neighborhoods and other things, rather than concentrating on making those neighborhoods both serviceable and responsible to the people who live in them. I think it's partly the result of the nature of urban life in America today. We've actually destroyed, for people who live in our cities, what used to be characteristic of small town life, which is that they governed the area where they live through representatives who lived in the same conditions that they do. That notion, which would these days, I guess, be neighborhood government, hasn't been properly implemented except as window dressing. And I think one of the things it leads to is police forces that are visiting rather than living in the community, the way the sheriffs and constables used to do in the days when our towns and other local communities were vibrant and real. We need to recapture that. I've been arguing this for 30 years on deaf ears because, why? I think the key culprit is two things. The centralization of government on account of a lot of this left-wing socialist influence, more and more pulling power into the hands of a centralized bureaucracy that makes people victims rather than really responsible citizens in the communities where they live. I think that's been a big culprit. And the other has been the assault on the family, because I think family life is essential, in point of fact, to the kind of conditions that are conducive to good life for adolescents and people growing up. And that was one of the key things of the study, as I recall. They pointed to the fact that in Johannesburg and Baltimore, the two cities who were worst of the 5 worst cities, one key major element was that both of them have large populations, majority populations of children who are no longer being raised in complete households. It's single-parent families.
Probably the city of Baltimore there who's calling in to try to get us to stop talking about them here at the moment. We have up on the screen right now a graphic that looks at Baltimore, Maryland, Ibadan, Nigeria, and Shanghai, China, talking about physical environment, social cohesion, and witness community violence. And if you look here on this board right now, and we're going to just quickly tell our viewers here that on the physical environment, the higher number is better, and that is the gray. On the social cohesion, the higher number is better, that's the red. And on the blue, the witness community violence, the lower is better. Shanghai has almost no community violence. The social cohesion, Ibadan is much better than Baltimore. And actually, if you look over in the physical environment, Baltimore is not far off from the other countries around the world. This is shocking, but there has to be a way to start getting to this now. There has to be a way to start rebuilding this, isn't there? Is this strictly just that our government doesn't care? That people don't want to understand that?
I think that right now, overall, and I think all Americans, it's not just people in Baltimore, are starting to realize that we have allowed a system to develop here where the government becomes an end in itself for the people who are part of it. Bureaucratic power, political power, this is what they pursue. They're no longer trying even to come up with approaches that are going to aid and abet and facilitate what people themselves are doing in their communities. And I think this is the great problem. We're supposed to be a people-led society, not a government-led society, a people-led, people-run society.
Then why aren't the people in there leading?
Government are our representatives.
Ambassador, why aren't the people in there leading then? Because they have the opportunity to take life into their own hands here. And it seems that a lot of things we're talking about these days, a lot of discourses, the people don't seem to be ready to do it or want to do it.
Frankly, I think that there's been a systematic assault on the institutions people use to take care of themselves, the family being foremost, but also now the institutions of faith, and finally, the material control that people have over the results of their own labor. Okay, the right to eat the bread earned in the sweat of their brow, as Abraham Lincoln said. That has been more and more usurped by a government that is taking over the decision-making control of more and more of our dollars and squandering those dollars in ways that have very little to do with the welfare of our people. And the big issues that we're debating, immigration, things like, all focused on matters that when you go to the bottom of the free trade issue and other issues, you're not talking about the well-being of people in America. You're talking about bureaucrats and politicians trying to make themselves look good, increase their power base, serve their economic masters by aggrandizing themselves using our dollars, our credit, by the way, so that we're almost out of good faith and credit that was built up over more than 2 centuries of the nation's existence. And we have to show for it what? A declining, disappearing middle class, and cities that, in spite of many years of leadership from left-wingers who say that government's going to do so much for her, those cities are decaying, and the people who are growing up in those cities are faced with problems that were once unheard of in America.
May even be time to go ahead and start trusting the government just a little less in a lot of these cases, because what was a beautiful city at one time is now in many ways in Baltimore. I know the people there won't be happy to hear me say that, but it is terrible. It is a war zone in some places, and it simply shouldn't be that way in that city or any other major city across America. So,
sadly, I've seen it in Baltimore. You see it in D.C. I remember when I was campaigning some years back, even then, you're talking to people who every day are hearing gunfire, are seeing bullets come through the windows of the places where they live, and so forth, and are in the context of a local government that is composed of people sitting on the city council who get to go back home and live in their gated communities
and
in
there you go.
that aren't subject
indeed
to
is
those
just
conditions.
part of it right there. Ambassador, we are all out of time, but I want to thank you for this. It's a fascinating story, but it's one we need to watch as well. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The Friday dance card continues. We bravely head inside that insidious beltway to see what, if anything, really got done this week. It's coming up here on MidPoint.